And try that again. Welcome, everyone. I am going to go ahead and get us started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Christina Gilbert with the Council for State Government's Justice Center. The mission of the CSG Justice Center is to develop research-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. This webinar is co-hosted in partnership by Georgetown University's Center for Juvenile Justice Reform and the University of Cincinnati Correction Institute. We're also really grateful for the support of the Federal United States Department of Justice's Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention for supporting this work. We're really excited to be here today with our expert panelists, Jill Manta from Bexar County and Brett Peterson from the state of Utah. Our panel will be moderated by Michael Pierre from CJJR. Before we dive into the discussion, I'm going to briefly outline the goals for today and a couple logistics. This webinar is being recorded, so if folks aren't able to make it, please feel free to share it and we'll disseminate it after the webinar. Please use the Q&A. I know the chat is open as well, but please use the Q&A for questions. We will save time at the end. We'll have about 15 minutes for questions, but we'll also be monitoring throughout and do our best to answer them during the discussion as we are able, but we may not be able to get to everything until the end. So why are we all here today? This is a hot topic. We know that though staff recruitment and retention has always been a challenge in the juvenile justice field, it seems like in part due to COVID-19, the Great Resignation, inflation, systems serving youth with more complex challenges, as systems sort of change how they think about who needs to be in the justice system, there seems like there's been a critical shift recently. These challenges are widespread throughout different aspects of the juvenile legal system. They exist across the country in locations of varying sizes, populations, and structures. They're not just happening within corrections facilities and carceral settings, but they impact probation departments, service providers, defense attorneys, prosecutors, and court systems as well. I'm sure I've missed folks too. Political divisiveness has made this issue a boiling point in many locales and is likely to be one of the largest challenges that we see moving forward to both basic operations and how these agencies and systems function, but also importantly to any meaningful reform within the juvenile justice field for the foreseeable future. The staffing challenges are contributing to, among other things, turnover, burnout, youth and staff safety, health and well-being, limiting access to programming, services, education, and resources for young people and necessary supports for them. Sometimes leading to longer system involvement unnecessarily, exacerbating racial disparities within juvenile justice systems, but they can also provide an opportunity. And so we're here to talk a little bit about that and how these challenges, some of the root causes, but also how they can provide an opportunity for rethinking how juvenile justice systems across the country operate. Our goal is to start this discussion today, but it's part of a much larger year-long project to bring national attention to and identify those root causes, their effects on youth and staff, and to identify and promote both short-term remediation strategies as well as long-term sustainable solutions for policymakers, agency leaders and managers, and other key stakeholders, including developing creative staffing solutions, rethinking workforce requirements, collaboration and coordination across youth-serving fields, and leveraging those for much larger scale juvenile justice policy changes, such as shrinking the numbers of youth involved in the system, reducing reliance on facilities, and increasing the use of grassroots community supports, mentors, and credible messengers, for example. And to begin that discussion today, it is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator and panelists. I'm not going to read their entire lengthy bios because they've all had very esteemed careers, but just so you know who is joining us today. First, we're joined by Brett Peterson, who is the director of the Utah Division of Juvenile Justice and Youth Services. He is responsible for the operation and management of the continuum of care, including early intervention, shelter, detention, long-term secure settings, and parole. As director, Brett is committed to reducing the need for out-of-home placements, correlating the services provided with the leading research related to adolescent brain development, and ongoing implementation of significant juvenile justice reforms. He's considered a national expert on system reform and implementation and is a frequent speaker and panelist. He's also the current president of the Council of Juvenile Justice Administrators. So thanks for being here, Brett. We are also joined by Jill Mata. Jill is the Chief Probation Officer for the Bexar County Juvenile Probation Department in Texas. She joined the department in July of 2018 as General Counsel after serving as General Counsel for the Texas Juvenile Justice Department for 4 years. Before working with the state of Texas, Ms. Mata held the position of Juvenile Division Chief Prosecutor for the Bexar County District Attorney's Office for nearly 16 years. During her tenure as Juvenile Division Chief, Ms. Mata participated in the development of several diversion programs and specialty courts. She received her board certification in juvenile law in 2001 and served on the Texas Board of Legal Specialization Juvenile Law Advisory Commission from 2009 to 2015. She's a past chair and council member of the juvenile law section of the State Bar of Texas and also a frequent speaker on juvenile law topics. She received her JD from St. Mary's School of Law and BA from Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas. So thanks for being here, Jill. Our discussion today will be moderated by Michael Umpierre, who's the director of the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform at Georgetown University's McCourt School of Public Policy, where he is responsible for overseeing all of CJJR's programs, initiatives, research, and operations. Michael has dedicated his career to improving the lives of youth, particularly those who are underprivileged, vulnerable, and most in need. He has a wealth of experience as a juvenile justice administrator, national trainer and consultant, public defender, and youth advocate. His previous experience includes serving as Chief of Staff of the District of Columbia's cabinet-level Juvenile Justice Agency, the Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services, trial attorney at the Public Defender Service for the District of Columbia, and program coordinator of the National Center for Youth in Custody. Michael received a BA in public policy from Stanford and a JD from Yale Law School, and is a recipient of the prestigious John Gardner Public Service Fellowship and Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship for New Americans. So I know that seemed lengthy, but that was only a quarter of all of their esteemed accomplishments that I could have shared. So we're really thrilled to hear from all of these great speakers today about some of the challenges they're facing. They're right in it with all of you, but also have some really great ideas and creative solutions. So it's now my pleasure to turn it over to Michael for us to begin that discussion. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Christina, for that wonderful introduction, and welcome everybody to our webinar. It really is amazing to see that we have upwards of 400 plus with us today on Zoom, and many others hopefully to watch the recording afterwards. This is an issue that is really facing the juvenile justice agencies and systems across the country. And I think the fact that we have 400 plus with us today is an affirmation of that. And as Christina mentioned, this really is an opportunity not only to discuss the current challenges that we're facing as a field with respect to staffing, but also to identify those strategies that we can implement really to improve the way that we recruit and retain our workforce, and to do it in the context of our larger goals, which ultimately come down to improving outcomes for the young people, the families, and the communities that we serve. So we look forward to a great conversation today. It really is intended to be a discussion. We look forward to your questions. Please don't be shy in submitting those questions in the Q&A box on your screen. And as Christina mentioned, we'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible. So with that, I'd like to jump right in. And I'm going to start with Brett and then turn to Jill. And I'll ask each of you just to provide context for our audience with respect to the agencies that you run and the jurisdictions in which you work. And once you've provided that context and that background in terms of what you do in Utah and Bexar County, respectively, talk a little bit about the challenges that you're currently facing with respect to the staffing issues around hiring and retention, and how those challenges you're seeing are impacting your agency operations, your system approaches, but most importantly, how they're affecting the ways in which you serve the young people that are in the care of your respective agencies. So Brett, I'll start with you for that context and discussion of challenges, and then I'll turn to Jill.
Great. Thank you, Michael. I was hoping you'd start with Jill. No, just kidding. It's okay. No, it's great to be here. And I think that, I know when I talk to my fellows around the country or here locally, I know why there's 450 people on this webinar. It's something that's been very significant and pressing on people in this field, and also like our sister fields like child welfare, the adult side as well. So here in Utah, we operate kind of the continuum of care. We don't have a county-based component in juvenile justice. So I feel really fortunate. We get to operate a lot of early intervention services, which has been awesome. We operate detention, home detention. We operate a lot of different community programs, all of the secure care facilities, and then your aftercare. And so our only other amazing partner here in Utah, really in this space, is the juvenile court. Juvenile court runs probation, and that's also a state level entity, but we run the facilities. So that's kind of the landscape of our continuum. This challenge, Michael, you know me a little bit, and I am an annoying optimist. And I do think that, I do feel like there's some light at the end of the tunnel in relation to staffing, and I hope others feel that way as well. I do think there's strategies, we'll talk about some of those today, that have started to make a difference. But truly, from my experience in Utah, we walked, everyone was just kind of bearing down, as it were, through COVID, right? And it was like, you just didn't know what was coming. It was chaotic. It was stressful. You were reinventing the wheel every single day on how do you serve in these facilities and keep it safe. We started coming out of that a little bit of a reprieve, and right into, in Utah, the tightest labor market in the country. And it was just, the things that we saw that were different. I have, for example, a lot of rural facilities where we rarely would see turnover. And all of a sudden we were in situations where, we had to shut units and be like, okay, we can't provide service in that community. And the other part of it I feel like it was really unique in this little bit of a perfect storm, maybe in this last few years, was the scope. It was every position. So you can't hire maintenance staff, you can't hire graveyard staff, you can't hire kitchen staff, let alone your core, like for us, our youth development specialists. And so, so what you end up with is kind of this really hard mix where, the staff you do have, they're starting to have to be pulled a few different directions. And ultimately, I'll kind of sum up to the end part of your question, how it affects individuals, the youth we're serving, which is, the most important part, trying to change young lives. And for us, I'll just use an example. I remember a young person, he was in one of our secure care facilities, and I happened to be at one of his parole hearings. And he basically said, look, I've had 5 different mental health therapists in this, it was a relatively short window of time. And that's not right. That's not fair for the continuity of care and treatment. And it was nothing we could control. Literally, it was just this turnover machine in that little time period. And like I said, it's getting a little better, but that's kind of what I feel like we've experienced in the last couple of years.
Thanks so much, Brad. And, so much of our work really comes down to the relationships that we form between our staff and the young people that we serve and the families. And when staffing levels are affected, our ability to engage with young people and families is directly impacted, as you're saying. So thank you for framing it in that way. And I'll turn to Jill from Bexar County to say a little bit about your agency, Jill, your jurisdiction, and some of the challenges that you're seeing from your perspective.
Yeah, so much of what Brett's saying is resonating with me and what we're going through here. We're located in San Antonio, Texas, so it's a big urban area, and we have when we're fully staffed, we should have like 700 employees. It's a big for a county department. It's a large department. We have a 24/7 hour detention facility for children who have not yet gone through the court process, and then we have a post adjudication secure care facility as well. And we have an oversight department, which is the state, the Texas Juvenile Justice Department. And so same thing during COVID, we just saw everything just shut down. And folks were really at that time, obviously afraid to do direct care work because nobody knew how to deal with COVID. There were no vaccines available. There was just not enough information out there. And so we also, our county, like a lot of counties, started worrying about the budget. And so there was a real effort to reduce the number of staff that you have, to freeze a lot of positions. And so there was a buyout, a retirement buyout that went on throughout the county too. So we saw an immediate reduction of workforce and then the inability to get new people to come in. And so people were really stretched thin. And so, you know, we were also, then when things started getting better, started kind of cranking up again, we had a lot fewer and a lot less qualified applicants. The turnover rate remained high. We were over 50% at one point, which is just not sustainable. We've seen, like Brett was saying, I'm optimistic. We've seen slow improvements. We've whittled away at it. We're now like 41, 42%, but it's now been stuck there for quite a while. So some of the gains that we've made, we haven't been able to figure out that next step to get things moving again. But that's what we're really working on. We've had to take a lot more risks than ever before in our hiring because of that situation. You know, you'll hear a lot of folks throughout our state talk about how we're sort of hiring whoever walks in through the door who qualifies for employment. And so that means you have to really be more mindful about supervision. You really have to, you know, be aware of the risk that you're taking and provide a lot more services to those folks, which we should be doing anyway, but it really really brings out the importance of that. Many of the folks that are coming in just aren't prepared for the difficulty of the work. They're not prepared for the schedule. The impact of that is huge because it's so hard to build and maintain morale when your ratio of new to experienced staff is so out of balance. And then, of course, the kids are directly affected. They feel the impact of less experienced staff, of less confident staff. Staff feel unsupported and in an unbalanced relationship with the kids. And the result is that you have a lot of kids out of programming and either due to their behavior, kind of misbehavior, or just the sheer lack of staff and inability to have programming going. So that lack of competency results in that lack of safety and security, and then that only exacerbates children's behavior. So we're just seeing that cycle. And again, we're seeing improvements, but absolutely that lack of stabilization has been stressful on everyone in the system.
Thanks, Joe. And let's delve into the root causes of some of the challenges that we're seeing with respect to retention, but also recruitment. You know, I think, you know, as Brett, as you framed it, the pandemic added so much stress to the field in so many different ways, but also I think opened up opportunities and doors and reimagining the ways that we can do business in the field as well. That being said, while it feels like these issues are more acute than ever, we know that this is not something, a challenge that's new to the field. Many of these issues really are longstanding. So I'd love to get your perspective on what's driving, you know, turnover. Why are people leaving in our current environment? And let's start there. Let's start with talking about retention, and then we can talk recruitment a little bit later. But in this moment of time, what are the root causes behind why staff are leaving our field? Brett, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a tough one in the sense that for me, you know, the root cause right now, it's hard to separate from kind of the genie's out of the bottle moment with COVID and, you know, telework and all of these. I mean, today I'm at home, you know, versus a staff who's, okay, I'm going to go in, I'm going to do shift work, I'm going to go be in a facility. I think the nature of the work has always been challenging and complex. I think that if you're in a state or a jurisdiction that maybe hasn't embarked on a reform journey, you're probably dealing with a very crowded facility. You're dealing with an environment that becomes much more, you know, control, compliance. For me, and I'm just sharing my own perspective, like that's not as fulfilling. I mean, I want to be engaged in the work. My agency, our touchstone, our foundation is positive youth development. And I want to be engaged in that type of an environment. If you can't create that type of an environment for whatever reason, that's going to be a more challenging place to say, oh, I'm going to go and show up and do this, and not seeing the types of outcomes you want to see. So I think that also, and I do think too, I'm one that's, Pay is an issue it's always the quick, easy solution we want to grab onto. I'm skeptical in the sense that I know it's so much more complex than that. But pay is a consistent thread through all of this. I think that's exacerbated in the last few years. I think juvenile justice is just that much further behind. And so that's going to be that much more challenging. So I think those are all kind of both root causes that have probably been a little bit more historic, and they probably have more of an acute element right now.
Thanks, Brett. Jill, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree. Over the years, we've seen the adults who want to do this work, they usually either have an interest in law enforcement, kind of a law enforcement, or an abiding passion to help young people. Sometimes you can get those two interests together and it can be an ideal candidate for our deeper end kids, right? I mean, it's different, the work that people are doing in the community, but we are focused a lot now on the turnover in our secure facilities. So we're not keeping children in our secure facilities unless they are really deemed to be dangerous to themselves or to the community. So it's a small group of kids with high needs, and so we need folks that can manage those children, but also have an abiding passion to help those young people. So those with that law enforcement focus, they're confronted with the reality that we do not treat children like jailed adults, nor would we want to, nor should we probably treat jailed adults like we treat jailed adults either. But they're in our situation, they're not going to be watching kids from afar. They're going to be close to children. They're not going to be using SWAT gear, that whole thing. So we're having to get that mindset where they're seeking to empower kids to change. And we've got to have staff understand that is not indulgent, that is a success strategy. So that's a challenge in this environment, especially when you look at who's coming to work in this field. Ideally, those staff can get so well trained that then they have the skills to incrementally intervene in a way that's empowering to kids, and then they feel the success and the children feel the success. And it doesn't make children also revert then to that kind of power and control. Those with a social work background, they come to us eager and soon after getting out of programming, but then they often can't gain the necessary skills soon enough to feel comfortable and effective. So that's our challenge, to get them to see that long-term success. So we can do a better job of informing staff about the long-term success of youth, and then also giving them the skill set to do this work. And so it's always been challenging, but now it's even more challenging because we're asking so much more of the people that come to us to do this work.
Yeah, I think in some ways, the true strength that we have in this field is that folks come to work, in my view, because of the impact that they can have on the lives of young people and families and communities. That involves, a lot of heart work, right? The passion, the commitment. And it's sort of a double-edged sword because the work is so challenging and folks care so much about the work that can contribute to some of the issues that we're seeing around fatigue and burnout. In fact, there's some research indicating that staff in the juvenile justice context who have that therapeutic mindset, that developmental mindset, which we know is effective at achieving the outcomes that we care about, including public safety, that those folks are much more likely to burn out than those who may have more of a correctional or punitive mindset to the work. And so in some ways, we have to find as a field ways to leverage our strength, which is we can really impact the lives of young people, but we have to do it in the context of really supporting staff around their wellness, to make sure that they've got the right tools to do their jobs, and to support them along the way, because anything that we want to achieve can't be done without a workforce that is fully supported and recognized for the good work that they're doing. So I hope we can talk a little bit about that. And I hope also that we talk about the importance of community partnerships as well as part of the strategies here, not just only thinking about this as a system issue, but how we can partner with individuals with lived experience, really elevating the voices of young people and families and folks from the communities to deliver services and to be part of the solution, because in many ways, those folks are true experts on the young people and the families that we're serving. I'd like to
Michael,
talk.
can I?
Yeah, go ahead, Brett, please.
Sorry, just one thing you said that just made me think about an experience I had recently with our staff. You know, you really look at juvenile justice systems across the country, and those that are truly grounded, like day in and day out, in evidence-based approaches. Some of that's pretty recent history, right? Like, we're not talking, this is something that's been in play for 20 years, to have really consistent, effective, youth-based programming. The same, though, goes to how we equip and work with our staff. So something you said is that kind of heart work. We're a DBT culture in Utah, like our systems, that's what we ground that's our programming basis, but we're trying to also incorporate that environment for our staff. And we were just in a training the other day, and that was exactly the discussion, is like, look, as staff, like, starting to embrace that dialectic, that the very thing that makes you good at this is also going to probably set you up for easier burnout potentially, because you care. And you are sad when you go home, or you're heartbroken when you learn about a kid that, didn't make the right choice, or didn't succeed, or we failed. But that we're on the right path, that we can at least acknowledge that, so we can start to work with our staff and helping them have the right tools, whether it's from the way they're approaching things, also how they're responding to their primary and secondary trauma. I think those are really important elements in this conversation.
Yeah, and Brett, I know that we love our acronyms in the field, but for those folks who may not be familiar with DBT, do you want to do a quick primer on that and how that's a big part of what you do in Utah?
Sure, it's dialectical behavioral therapy, and so that's just our primary, like, kind of treatment modality we use with our youth. But it's also part of, now we train all of our staff in it as well. So they all are learning the skills, and we're starting to kind of create kind of a ecosystem of dialectical behavior therapies. Basically, the dialectic component of it is that it can be both things. It can be both fulfilling and heartbreaking, and learning to kind of find a space of acceptance in between there.
And we're doing that same thing too, and have been for several years now, and agreed, like, everything that we're doing for children, we're cognizant that we need to be doing it for staff too. Our state agency, the Juvenile Justice Department here in Texas, we've been having work groups throughout the state to address some of these issues, and we've talked a lot about stress inoculation. How do you inoculate these staff, for the ups and downs of the work? And so it's very positive. It's a positive sign, right, that we're all talking about that we need to do that, and that that we're showing that kind of that love, to everybody, right? Like, we're seeing everybody needs that sort of support. The kids need it, the staff need it, and if the staff do well, then the kids do well, right? We know that. So
we have a question in the chat that it's directly related to the DBT approach, and the question is, why did you decide on DBT as kind of a foundational piece in your approach there?
For us, we're always looking to learn from other jurisdictions and watching, and I think it's just got such a great full complement of tools, everything from, like, kind of emotional dysregulation to just really direct skills, and also too, just kind of that finding that space again where it's not the black and white thinking, and seeing how it also, the thing that's been cool for us is that we have line staff that engage in that delivering of that treatment. And that's where it starts to really change the whole culture and environment, because they're kind of one-on-one working right with the young people, working through the skills with them. It's not just something, they still have their therapist and they still go through therapy, but having those skills groups run by line staff's been really, really powerful.
Thanks, Brett. Joe?
I agree. Same thing. The fact that it empowers line staff to really create change within the child, right in the midst of the work. They spend the most time with the kiddos, right, than anybody else, and so then they are developing this skill set, this competency that is amazing. That's one of the reasons why we've been saying that the field is underpaid, right? They bring such a rich when folks learn how to do this well, they're amazing at it, and it's a highly skilled modality that they learn how to do, and people feel better about their job when they're doing DBT well. I mean, and I'm sure there are other modalities you could say the very same thing for, but that is the one that we chose too, because it works so well with these deeper end children that we have, children with very high risk, high needs. So
that's great. And let's talk a little bit about, some of the strategies that we can implement to address some of these challenges. In the short term, what can we do as a field to help bring, more stability, to ensure that young people are receiving the services and supports that they need in the context of the staffing issues that we're seeing? We had one question in particular. I think this pertains to the retention side of things, but around this notion of really supporting staff wellness, and how do you truly do that, particularly in a facility setting, but also in the community for those folks who work in the community? How do we think about short-term strategies to promote staff wellness, to help staff get the support that they need to do their jobs well, and hopefully stay, with the agency for a long time? So, Brett, do you want to jump in there, and then I'll turn to Jill?
Yeah, sorry. I was just thinking, everything and anything, right? Is part of it. And there'll be the kind of, I think, the lower hanging fruit, bonuses and pay and those things. For us, one of the really specific strategies we landed on was we had to create, it was focusing on wellness. But from us, it was from the top, how do we help create an environment where all of our staff felt seen, where they have voice, where we can create that culture and that environment. So, it was everything from establishing formal peer support to providing money in the budget for staff to have lunch together, to have, employee of the month, the facility director gets to take them out to lunch, things like that. We have a Friday video every week from me. We have a formal staff council. We have a weekly huddle that kind of goes up through the ranks of our whole agency. And what we're focusing on that huddle, we're always just asking a few things. It's not complex. We're asking for kudos. We're asking for stories of positive youth development. And we're asking, how can we help? What help do you need? And so it was, being very deliberate and being very intentional to really, I think it's creating voice. At the same time, we moved along in tandem, really enhancing the presence of voice for our young people. Because I know it seems different, but I feel like they're all connected. It's the ecosystem of the work you do. And so making sure that we don't just have youth councils on paper, like they're empowered. They need to be able to meet with me. They need to be able to elevate things to me. We need staff that are dedicated to that. So youth coordinators that are dedicated to that, that can help kind of bridge these gaps. And so those are those things, those more immediate things I feel like that any agency could embark on. You have to think about it, and there's ways to be strategic about it, but saying, okay, really deliberately, I'm going to get proximate with my staff. I'm going to help them know they are seen and I got their back and I care about them. Because at the end of the day, we're all facing the constraints we're facing relative to pay and the work and the challenges we're facing with it. But if I can start there, that's going to start creating this environment. And our peer support, I felt like through COVID, and then I'll be quiet, but I felt like through COVID, our peer support, we were so glad, we got it really structured, and we launched it right before COVID hit. And man, we were so grateful because we had so many staff that was the connector for them, that they knew no matter what, if something happened, they were getting a contact from a peer support, which was confidential. There was a structure to it. There were some rules to it. And it just helped people stay a part of the whole. We need that. We need that sense of community. I do think that's the power and the opportunity in these lines of work. There can be a sense of camaraderie and community of, hey, we're doing this thing. We're setting about to change young lives. That's pretty powerful. But we're human beings too. And so creating some of those little supports and really intentionally doing that has really paid some big dividends for us.
Thanks, Brett. Jill, what are your thoughts on short-term strategies around retention? And then I want to turn to recruitment also, because I know, Jill, in Bexar County, you're being more creative around how you market and thinking about the workforce and how do we attract candidates to the job. But just sticking on the retention point and around staff wellness, what are some short-term things that agencies or systems or facilities can do?
Well, and I'm going to echo a lot of what Brett said again. I mean, a lot of it is that interpersonal connection with staff to help them feel connected. But the first thing we did was kind of a practical thing. We just reduced the population as much as we could, because we knew that that's where it all started, right? We had to figure out in the midst of COVID and kind of right after COVID, what was the thing that we had some control over immediately? And that was brainstorm with the judges. We have three juvenile court judges in our jurisdiction, and to kind of brainstorm with the judges and get everyone's buy-in to reducing the population safely as much as we could. And so we really saw huge reduction in our number of kids. And that meant taking more chances. It meant really, you really have to have an effective risk assessment tool, and you've got to have buy-in by all the stakeholders. So we had to intentionally work on that. We always had a good relationship here with our stakeholders, but it was a very major focus. And then also stepping some kids down to different sorts of community supervision, and then also try not to overuse that too, because for instance, if you use ELM, you can put a child on a monitor and then you sort of forget and they're on the monitor too long too. So you have to be careful at every phase of that step down. And then for those staff who are overworked on our floor direct care, we really weren't having number of problems with our retention for staff that were not direct care. So I'm really focusing on that direct care number. Now, we knew if we overutilized or overburdened our non-direct care staff with additional duties and responsibilities, they might then leave, right? So it's a balancing act. You want everyone's help, but you want to do it in a respectful, careful way. So for those that were on the floor, we really made sure they were seen, that they were acknowledged by their supervisory chain, including leadership, that myself and the other deputy chiefs were actively going to the facilities and being seen in a much more they were much more visible than in times past. We used a pool reserve. We've always had a reserve staff that we call pool staff, but we expanded that. We tripled it in number, and the way we did not want to ask people, like require people to do the work. We wanted to invite them and have them do the work willingly. So that meant everyone in the whole agency had to know the problem and buy into the problem and have compassion for their fellow colleague, right? And so there was a lot of that kind of sharing the problem, sharing all the things that we were trying to do to shoulder the burden, like splitting shifts, like, making a shift even smaller by splitting it so that you could have overlap and you wouldn't have to EM so many people, and then share staff from one facility to another when feasible. But then you have to carefully do that so everybody really appreciates the move, because it's very hard on the staff who's coming over and flexing their schedule or their work environment. And then, so that highlighting of the work of everyone to each other, really to bring that community together, that community of staff together, was really critical. And we're still really working on that, because you can't forget that right now while things are going better. You have to kind of keep up the fresh approach all the time. We're trying to get better applicants in the front door by expanding our outreach and our marketing. We've even had staff, we're working on a more professional or more useful website, but we've had staff share the hiring notices on their own Facebook page and saw a huge number of increased applicants just from that. And we did a retention, some hiring bonuses, referral bonuses for staff for a little while, also when the budget allowed for it. And basically really having to continue to offer quality education and training to the staff you have so that you're rewarding their accomplishments. Our state agency has started utilizing a 60-day buddy system with very positive early results. I'm fascinated by it. We're hoping to do it in January, but they take new staff when they come in the door and pair them together for 60 days and consider them one staff. And the early results on that are really great. And so that's an exciting option too. Staff are going to feel valued when they feel heard, right? And when they're well trained. in the areas that they need the most training and most help in. So that's really what we're trying to do, is just chip away at it with everyday acknowledgement, using that suggestions box that we've had for a while now. It gets 3 times the traffic it used to, because we invite people to provide suggestions often, and to be grandiose in their requests, to see what kernels of truth we can get out of that.
Yeah, thanks,
So,
Joe. I think
can I add-
yeah, go
sorry,
ahead. No,
sorry.
please.
I just want to add one little quick comment. I know there's a lot of folks on here saying, okay, what are just like some nuts and bolts? And we're talking ideas and all these things that obviously they can follow up with us. A really easy one too, as far as I think it's recruitment and retention, is go through your onboarding process and make it, mistake proof. Like, it doesn't, we all can do better at onboarding, but like, we had to go through and say, okay, we're going to identify coaches. We're going to identify a really easy approach. So when you come on board, in the first 30 days, this is the type of knowledge you're going to get, the care you're going to get. That's something that any jurisdiction could step back, do kind of a theories of constraint, kind of work on it or whatever, some outcome driven approach to it, and say, okay, what do we need to do to get this streamlined and, full kit every single time?
I love that idea too of conditional offers. We started making like a conditional offer, so that when people are probably going to be able to make it through the process, you can let them know that they are, basically that they're going to be employed. We used to wait until the whole process was over, and there was a lot of resistance in doing that. But I think there are ways that you can carefully make those offers and get people connected to the job as early as possible, so they don't leave and try to find another job while you're getting through the process.
Yeah, so Joe, I think, and Brett, both of you mentioned that the strategies here are not just strategies that happen within the walls of a program, but they're system level strategies as well. So I want to talk about that for a few minutes. Jill, you talked about the importance of really right sizing the system to make sure that the youth population really reflects the young people, particularly for the deep end of the system, those with the most complex needs, the highest risk, and how that's part of the strategy here. You also talked about the workforce and thinking about who we recruit and the job functions of our staff, their experience, their skills. Is this an opportunity in your view? And Brett, I'll start with you and then turn to Jill. Is this an opportunity to think about those larger system transformation efforts around, right-sizing the system, around reimagining our workforce? Jill, I know you've done work to bring more social workers within your agency. Brett, you've done a lot of thinking about, the functions of your staff and, what you even call them, and youth development specialists and what have you. Is this an opportunity to think about not just the ways in which we recruit and the ways in which we develop environments of wellness for staff, but also those larger system issues? Brett, I'll turn to you first.
Wonderful question, and absolutely yes. I think it goes right to the heart of the first thing that I mentioned at the start of this. Like, you're not going to solve this type of issue, nor should you, just by to use the phrase "feed the beast." Like, oh, let's just get more funding. Let's get more funding. Every jurisdiction should be starting first and foremost. Look, kids will do better if they're served in their home schools and communities. So create the hardline policies that ensure that kids are staying in their home schools and communities. We understand there's situations from imminent public safety where a youth may need to be incarcerated. But if you don't first do that policy work and have those conversations with your stakeholders, this is going to be a really long uphill battle. So I think making that change, that allows your system. I mean, I look at us, like we've been able to, we've done that. We've done a lot of that policy work. There's always more of it to be done, but trying to make sure that the youth that are in our settings, it's really only based on that public safety perspective. There's no other situations. And even then, we're trying to find ways to serve them effectively in their home schools and communities. Well, that has reduced our footprint and our need for these facilities. Well, we were able to close a facility, and then we closed it. It actually got tore down. And so now all of a sudden I have this additional pool of staff They're staff, we've been focused on a positive youth development framework. They're staff that want to be in this work to change young lives. So we were really well positioned to say, you know what? We provide a lot of early intervention, community, completely voluntary services. So I can transition those staff there. They're still engaged in this fulfilling work. They're still part of it. Now, during this last couple of years, we've had to call on those staff to come help us in facilities. But I just think if we miss that, we can't miss that opportunity. And it'll help, because there are jurisdictions I've had conversation with and they're completely full. And there's a lot of complexities to that. I know that, secure care settings, I know there's complexity because lengths of stay change, especially as some states have made shifts and said, okay, we're not sending youth to the adult system, for example, but they might have longer lengths of stay in secure care. That's going to create complexities on length of stay. But resoundingly, yes, to your question, it is an opportunity.
Joe?
Yeah, I think so too. It is definitely a chance for us to show that fewer kids need secure confinement in response to misconduct, right? And a lot of us here and listening, and I think have all been focused on this for a long time, like reducing the number of kids that are in secure confinement. It worries me right now because we're seeing a crime rate increase, and we're seeing it among juvenile in the juvenile population as well. And so I'm very mindful of the possibility of this backfiring. And so I think we have to really use this time to look at those additional additional systems out there that serve children. So it's exactly what Brett's talking about in terms of we need to make sure that there are, for instance, a prime opportunity is disciplinary alternative education systems, our DAEPs. That's a prime place to intervene with children and keep them from going deeper in the system. And so there are a lot of focus that we can focus on different parts of the system right now and on a system secure approach where we can keep kids from ending up in the deeper end of the system, even while we're looking at this crime rate increase that we're seeing in some jurisdictions. So if we can expand those connections to the community with our mentoring programs, our system navigators, and our job skill development, it's the perfect time to do it. And that can help keep those numbers in secure confinement low that we've now grown accustomed to, seeing those lower numbers in secure confinement. We also, due to it's a tricky thing, but due to staffing shortages, we're now been made to operate at a healthier number of kids. So the ratio isn't right yet of staff to child, but the actual number is better. So it feels. It just feels more comfortable for everyone if we can now just get that additional amount of staff in. And as I think y'all have pointed out before, the kids want more staff too. Everyone's talking about needing more staff because things run better for the kids too when there's more staff and the right more staff. Also, the current activity shows that our own post-adjudication placements can substitute somewhat for some state commitment. And that's a little bit tricky also because we don't, at our level at the county, don't want to become the standard of care for our most violent offending youth. So because it takes resources away from the work that we do best, which is that keeping kids in the shallow end of the system, out of the system altogether, diverting kids from the system. So that's something else that we have to be really mindful of. We can do more for kids here to keep them from going into state care, but we cannot supplant or replace that work. And so it's a balancing act that we have to, we really need to get some broad political commitment for all the kids in our system so that we can make comprehensive changes.
So Jill, just to go back to this as an opportunity to think about our workforce, who's part of our team, who's part of our staff. Can you talk a little bit about this as an opportunity to perhaps attract candidates that might not otherwise historically come to juvenile justice? How should we be thinking about that? There's a lot of work happening across the country around partnering with folks with lived experience, incredible messengers. For me, that's an essential part of the strategy here around developing those community partnerships. But talk a little bit about this as a moment in time to think about, to take to pause and ask the question, who should we be bringing into the field? What are the types of skills, orientation, experience that we should be looking at? And I know you've done some work in Bexar County in that respect.
It is. So that the rules have changed a bit in our state that allow more expansive hiring, which is great. And so we are, because we've long wanted to include in our hiring pools more folks that have some lived experience and can really be a mentor and role model for the kids. And we're in that situation where we can do that more now. I'm very excited about the efforts that we've made in that regard. I will say it does it makes us realize that we also then need to provide that support to staff in order to make that work the right way. I mean, you have to be mindful of the age of those candidates and the recency of their experience in the system, because this working in our system can be very traumatizing to someone who's actually had experience in our system. So I think we have to make sure that we're doing the right things there, and it's a great opportunity for us to do it. And so we're also wanting, as we talked about before, more people with a social work background to be attracted to this work. In order to keep them, though, we have to make the work meaningful. We have to provide the right amount of training and mentoring and support so that this hard work feels good to them and is effective. So,
Brett, what are your thoughts on this workforce question, and who should we be thinking about?
Well, I love the lived experience, Michael. I think I expressed this to you. We were having a conversation at one point, and like that would be my vision, is to see us create a more perfect circle of healing, where individuals with lived experience who have been formerly incarcerated and have shown, sustainable change are there engaging with young people, helping them see that, look, there's a way out. There's just that peer approach. There's such a power to it. I remember I was in one of our facilities not that long ago. We actually had the state of Washington had came and visited Utah, and they brought a team out, and they brought kind of one of their main credible messengers with them. And we were on the unit in one of our facilities talking to some young people, and they were just like, I don't blame them. I'm just like a boring, dad guy. And they're just like, blah, 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 Brett, and the credible messenger was there with us. And they were none of them they all had their backs turned to him. And then he spoke up, and he just like, look, I've been right where you're at. Every head in that room turned instantly. The power of that. And so what I hope and I envision, I know there's some jurisdictions doing some different things, and I think it's starting, there's some little infancy kind of things. What I would love to see is just this intentional effort where not only are credible messengers doing, the coaching and helping and being a part of it. And I know some jurisdictions have done that very well, but then seeing that kind of follow through where young people who are now transitioning out, they're able to have a pathway back in to this potential employment. And I think that, and hopefully, community driven, that would be really powerful. And I want to see it someday. I also think too, and I don't know, there's no, like someone smart can figure this out, like the science to it, but there is like, there's a certain staff, like we talk about, like we want like coaches. We want people who often maybe they've been coached or they know how to coach. They approach things that way, that mindset. I also heard it once said, I'll keep throwing out a couple other states. I was in Oregon, and they said, we like to hire people that are, maybe their staff will not like this, so I'll have to apologize to them, but we want, especially in secure care, we want bland and boring was the term they used. Like people who aren't easily like elevated. They're just kind of chill, like, it's okay. Let's talk through this. I don't know how you identify that completely, but it. I mean, I have a ton of those types of staff that are just awesome. They're just that coach mentality, like, hey, it's, calmness, let's walk through it. So some of that, I'm being a little long-winded here, Michael, but some of that takes, like, we got to challenge all these old, Chesterton fences we have in our systems. Like, okay, well, they have to have this degree, they have to pass this test. And it's like, well, why? Like, is there research behind that? Is there anything that's showing that that's a more effective staff? So we've totally changed, we totally changed our requirements along the way. Like there are educational requirements, or they can do it through experience. And we're continuing to challenge that. So at first, for example, some of the educational requirements, it was for these types of degrees. And now we're like, well, wait a minute. What if someone has like a sports science degree? That might actually be really cool. Like we play intramural sports with our kids. So why would we, you know what I mean? Like that's like a real life conversation. So I just think it takes, what I'm saying, there's not a specific answer to a lot of it. The answer is being willing to challenge it and be curious about it and be a little bit bold. And like, I think to Jill's point, it will create challenges. You hire, if you're opening your doors more and more to your hire, you're going to have challenges. You're going to have boundary issue challenges. If you're hiring younger people, for example, you're going to, I mean, it's across, they're always going to come up, but you just kind of weigh it and say, you know what, it's worth navigating and worth trying, and we can just continually adapt.
Yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity right now because it's been so hard to hire, that now is the time we can expand on those things that we've been talking about for 10 years, right? I think the educational requirement, that's a prime one, and that's a hot topic right now in the state as they're looking at revising some of that. It's huge because the experience is what we really want, right? I mean, there are some things you're going to have an educational requirement, but the experience piece is so critical and makes such a difference. The other thing, because it's harder, I know every jurisdiction is different in terms of what they can do with credible messengers and contracting. Sometimes there's prohibitions to contracting as a youth serving agency with various entities. But one thing that's going on here that I think is doable in a lot of places is that a lot of city either health divisions are hiring credible messengers. And so we've been able to, now we're in the early stages of that, where we're connecting kids through that. So it's not our contract with the credible messenger, but it's a contract or a MOU or a agreement with the other governmental entity, and they have then the credible messengers. And so that's a way too, because we do know the more we can connect kids with non-justice related mentors and non-justice related folks, the more successful the model is going to be, you know, the pathway for the child is going to be. And so we're excited about that possibility, because we've been having to think of how do you make those connections if you can't contract with those folks or always hire them. So
Yeah, thanks, Jill and Brett. And I'm going to turn to the questions here. We've got one question focused on recruiting and retaining diverse staff, making sure that your staff reflect the populations of young people that you serve. And the question is, have you experienced any challenges with recruiting and or retaining a diverse staff? And if so, are there any strategies that you've found to be helpful? And there's another question here that's related to this, saying what's also being done to help staff be more culturally aware, what DEI practices are being implemented within your programs there. So I don't know if either one of you want to jump on that, on either one of those questions.
I can take a stab. I think it is really critical. I think part of it will just start with kind of intentionally putting that in your, whether it's your strategic plan. Like, so for us, one of our strategic efforts and the results we're trying to accomplish is to reduce racial and ethnic disparities in our system. When we started getting into some of the tactics, that was our objective. When we started getting some of the strategies and tactics to accomplish that, we actually identified recruiting. Like, that's exactly where we kind of started, because we were like, what are the things we can control? That's what we started looking at. Well, part of it is, who do we hire? Who do we bring in? So we started intentionally a couple strategies. You have to work it through with your HR. There are things you have to be thoughtful about. There's legalities there, but there are things you can put into the language of your hiring. Like, look, we're trying to hire. We want to have diverse perspectives in our agency. We also just made a requirement of when you do like panels, hiring panels, you have to have diversity on that panel. And we don't define diversity much beyond that, because again, there's things we have to kind of balance and walk through with that. But look, you need to have other partners at the table. You need to have other voices, other perspectives at the table. And then the last thing we did relative to that is being really, I'll quit using the word intentional. See how many times I can say it in one sentence, but being really, it's such a nice little buzzword in these types of things. Being really intentional in when we've started like trying to make sure we have a community presence. So whenever there's a community event, there's a community kind of carnival or cultural event, something like we had the national, our state refugee day, for example. we make sure we find a way to get a table out there. We're out there. We're doing two things. We're advertising about our early intervention, kind of voluntary services. And we're also saying, hey, come try a career that gets to do some of that hard work. And so that's the things we've really tried to do to help that.
And we're in our real early stages of, I mean, it's a topic of conversation that we've had in my current role just a few years now. Getting through COVID, it's definitely something that we're talking about in terms of recruitment. And we're, and I'll borrow the word intentional, Brett, but we're trying to be very intentional also about making sure there's representation as we make hiring, promotion decisions, wanting the array of staff to reflect the children that we have in our facility. And so it's, and we're in the midst of some efforts right now on that. So I'm hoping that we'll have even more to report on that in the next 12 to 18 months.
We have, just sticking on the recruitment theme, there's a question here about rural areas in particular. And how do we go about recruiting, hiring folks in rural areas? Either one of you have thoughts on that?
You know, I could say, I mean, we're not a rural area, but we provide services for some of the rural areas that don't have their own detention facilities and things. And in my conversations with my colleagues throughout the state, it is a real struggle for them. And I think one of the main conversations everybody's having is allow for more variation in who you can hire, right? Like, to use that experience piece, allow experience to sub for some of the educational requirements that, and I think that's been something that they've long asked for. And I think that's something, because of what we're going through now with COVID, that may happen. And we know that folks that have a heart for this work, they can learn how to do it and be amazing experts in the work. And so that educational piece is not the be all end all. It's that experience and the heart for the work.
Yeah, I would add, Michael, the rural is really interesting because historically, I kind of mentioned that was never a really challenging, because there wasn't as many jobs, you know, in some of the rural, in Utah, some of our rural communities, they didn't have a lot of job opportunities. So, you know, a steady state job was something that a lot of people stayed, and they stayed in it for a long, long time. It wasn't until this little upside down world we've been in that we started seeing that. A couple things that, you know, I think also what Jill had mentioned, I feel really blessed. I've had some really strong, you know, facility directors in those communities. I love to steal people from neighboring states like Colorado. No, just kidding. I mean, some of my rural places are kind of close. But one thing is also too, like, you never know. Like, I've had a couple folks who weren't from rural areas who wanted to go out to a rural area, and they're doing a great job and bringing, you know, a new perspective, things like that. So just kind of being, you know, thinking outside the box a little bit on that, how to staff in those areas. But it can be hard because it's just a smaller workforce a lot of times.
Yeah, thanks to both of you on that. A different theme that I'm seeing in the questions here from our attendees is around how we message the importance of staffing to our stakeholders, particularly our legislators. There's a question here: why do you think it is that, you know, across the board we can't get traction on proper pay for staff in juvenile justice? And a separate question about, you know, how do we get legislators to really care about these issues and understand the importance of it? So can you talk a little bit about that stakeholder engagement piece and some of the messaging that perhaps folks in the field can be thinking about, and engaging those folks to understand you know, the complexities and the need for investing in staff and investing in the services ultimately and supports that the kids, the young people that we serve, can receive?
Sure, I'll take a stab. I mean, I think that there's a lot, you know, to kind of walk through when you're thinking about working with your legislature. And obviously, like me, like, I'm a state agency, and so you have to work in coordination. You get to work in coordination with your governor's office and what's going to be their priorities in their budget. Here's what I'll say that can be universal: youth voice and positive youth development, exposing legislative champions to that to let them hear the young people, let them see them, get them out in your facilities. For me, there's been nothing more effective than building champions than that. And because they see it, and those become champions in many, many ways. You know, I think of my appropriations chair right now. You know, he knows our work. He also ran a bill 2 years ago to introduce higher education for incarcerated youth in our state, where every youth in secure care has access to like real college, you know, courses from a state university, because he has, you know, a piece of his heart for these young people. So that to me is something that can universally be applied.
Yeah, that's like the $1 million question, I think, really, right? To get the people who can affect change really buy into the, you know, that's a huge question. I mean, I think getting folks to the facilities or to your world is huge, right? Like that's when you talk about IDing champions, like how do I identify a champion and then help them become a champion for you. We're not a state agency, we're a county agency. So our you know, we have a smaller group to work with initially, but obviously what happens at the state level impacts us a lot. And they are going to respond to constituency. So really, if you can get them to your facility and see what staff are going through, and then also see what kids are going through. So both they get youth voice and then they get staff voice. And I think that's been one of the more effective things for us. We're a big, we're a local jurisdiction, but we're a large jurisdiction. And that's how we've built our champions. I mean, they identify with the staff, they identify with the kids, and they end up being real, a voice of support for them. But it is really hard. And I think in states, I'm so intrigued in states where you're merging your child welfare with your juvenile justice, because I think then that message is so, it's such a beautiful kind of child-centered message, you know, where in the majority of the states there isn't that pairing, I think, right? And that's and we don't have that in Texas. And I think if you also have other child-serving agencies that are in crisis, like the child welfare system in Texas is in crisis completely. And so then you have multiple systems who are in crisis, you know, trying to work out the problem. But I do think it starts with having people really see and feel what's going on with kids and with staff.
I think that's right, Jill, and helping understand, you know, what the research shows is effective to promote positive outcomes. And, you know, at the core of it is we know that a developmental therapeutic approach is much more likely to improve public safety and, you know, lead to the outcomes that we care about than, you know, correctional punitive approaches. And so helping our stakeholders understand that research and see how you're operationalizing that on the ground in your programs is vitally important. So I couldn't agree with you more. There's some interest here on the part of our attendees to hear more about your work around peer support for staff and for kids. There was a question here, Jill, I think related to the CJJD model that's in development. So I don't know if you can provide any more detail than you've got, recognizing that it's one of your counterpart agencies. But could either one of you share kind of more detail on that peer support piece and how that can impact and support staff that are in your agencies?
Well, one thing I could start by saying, a lot of us already know the importance of having a mentor, right, for new staff. So new staff come in and are mentored with a more senior staff. And I think that's a solid and a good model. What I was intrigued with this buddy pairing of two new staff is that it takes the pressure off that new staff if you're considering them both to be one. And I love the idea that it's building camaraderie early on. And so I think it's such an intriguing idea. So I'm looking forward to seeing how it works for us. But their early reports are great. And then it also allows, you know, we run into that problem, especially when you're shorthanded, when new people come in out of training, a lot of times they'll get the message that I know that's the perfect way to do it, but we can't do it the perfect way right now, because so let's do it the real way. And it gives those folks a chance to say, no, I need to stick to my training. I'm going to stick to the training model. And when you have an imbalance of new to experienced staff, those things can happen pretty easily. And I think it's beneficial then for the senior staff too, because you have two folks that aren't feeling as much pressure because they're paired together, and then it helps really build a solid skill set and that so important camaraderie, that teamwork and camaraderie. So I really like that. But we're still, DBT has a really good focus on mentorship and staff support meetings. So I think those things are really important.
Yeah, on peer support for us, it was not a heavily a resource heavy endeavor. It did take some resources for us. We originally hired a consultant to kind of come in because we wanted it to be an effective peer support, and I think confidentiality is kind of at the heart of a lot of those models. You naturally are going to have issues with just go for fun, go home, go after the webinar today and ask your HR specialist, like, hey, we're going to do this peer support, and they can call and talk to them about anything, and just see the responses you get. But there are things they have to be really thoughtful about, and also kind of chain of command questions too. You've got to be really thoughtful about. So basically, we initially started with a consultant. What we found was the initial guidance we had, it was much more law enforcement centric. I think that's where these have been established models for a lot longer, these very formal, like, okay, this happens, someone's calling you. And so we just took it and we just started customizing it ourselves. But the main thing was having like a charter, having guiding documents, having a board, essentially a peer support board, and they're all made up of staffs. We have leads, that form this board. They meet regularly, they have their protocols, they talk, and then starting just to recruit amongst our agencies statewide in every facility, who wants to be a peer support. And we've had a lot of people step forward and do that. And then once you have that structure in place, then it was easy for us to just operationalize and say, okay, and it took time, but okay, these events, someone's involved in a physical intervention, or you hear that someone's, their dad passed away, peer support's reaching out. So we do a ton of like positive, proactive outreach, but then they also have they can always call into those lines as well.
I think there's a benefit to the chain, because right now our chain of command does that with staff when there's been an incident. And I think there's a benefit to that too. I know it doesn't have the peer or anonymity to it, but I do like that it builds that trust and it builds that empathy, throughout the unit. So we've had quite a bit of success, I think, with that, with the chain of command calling and checking on somebody, especially in light of it, if an event happens, even if it's not a major event, but an event happening.
Thanks. So there's a question here about meeting the needs of young people with behavioral health issues, and how the staffing component is an essential component of that. I think from understanding your systems and your agencies, you all have done a lot of work around shrinking the youth population that come to your facilities, that enter the deep end of the system. As a result, is it fair to say that the population of young people that you're serving now in your programs, it's a higher concentration of kids with those most complex needs? And if that's the case, how should we be thinking about staffing in the context of meeting those needs, particularly those complex behavioral health needs, to address the question posed by one of our attendees here? What is that behavioral health component looking like, and making sure that you have those folks being part of the team and the recruitment? Are you seeing any challenges with respect to that group of employees?
Well, we have had a huge, it has been a challenge. The two categories have been our security officers, our correction officers that work with the kids, and then our therapists. That's been a huge issue, because now that field is so different. They can work remotely so easily now. So even folks that really love the work were tempted, and some did leave because they just couldn't rationalize it in their mind with their own family life, with the ability to do that work remotely. So we've had to adjust salaries, although people don't do the work solely for the salary, right? But so we've had to think of ways to bring in and be more creative about who we bring in. Ideally, you would want, and the state I know has talked about this and does this. They have a different staffing model for kids that need more support in that way. But we're not at a point where we can afford to do that staffing wise. We don't have a different staffing model for those kids. I mean, unless they're in a situation where they're having to be monitored very frequently because of possible suicide. But I think to build these teams, you have to have that component there. So we have to think of a way to have those staff members connected. The model that we're using through DBT, you do that, because of the way the staffing is set up, and you're having that happen. But we're going to have to pay more. It's not just money, but we're going to have to pay more for those folks who are doing this work, because the competition out there is just, it's crazy. It's very extreme.
Michael, I would add to that too. So, I mean, to your question, yes, we know that it is a more complex population that's coming through our doors. I look at detention. I pulled our data over the last year. Actually, it might have been last 2 years, looking at our mental health screeners when, young people are being introduced into detention, and it's 50% higher acuity. The majority of kids coming into, a small majority, coming into detention, they are going, having to go right onto some type of a suicide protocol. I mean, based on their mental health screenings. So that's just, that's a reality. And it's also, it takes, we have to continue to embrace the cultures in our agencies. So the example I'll use is, I've been in many conversations, for example, with say my child welfare counterparts, where they're like, well, but that kid's, we don't deal with that kid. That kid's just a delinquent type kid, right? I've heard often in the last couple of years, I'll hear some of my staff saying, I'll deal with the delinquency kid. I don't know what to do with this mental health kid. And so it's having to kind of shift our whole system, saying, look, these are the kids that are coming, and we've got to figure out how to best serve them. But it's a balance. We don't want to widen the net. We don't want to create de facto mental health hospital settings in juvenile detention, because guess what? The kids will come if we do. So, but at the same time, I have to do better at serving them. So one thing that we employed recently was we created a clinical support team, which were basically specialized staff, more intensive mental health professional support, and also line staff that had more specialized training, kind of behaviorist training. And we deployed them throughout, multiple facilities. So they're there helping ratio in general. They're there helping those young people who might have some more of these behavioral challenges. But then we can also deploy them. If we have a young person that literally can't be served anywhere else, because we have hospitals that tell us no, they say, you can't come here. So if they can't be served anywhere else, we can then deploy that team and, do a 2-to-1 staffing or 3-to-1 staffing to make sure they're safe, to make sure they're getting the care they need. So that's just a recent kind of innovation for us. But without a doubt, it is a more complex population. It's a more distilled population. I mean, that's one of the byproducts of reform. It's right sized, but it is something we'll have to continue to navigate.
Yeah, and I think you're speaking to it, but efforts to break down traditional silos within programs where education does its thing, behavioral health does its thing, custody does its thing, and we really have to be finding ways to come together and collectively as a team, to serve the youth. So really important.
And one of the concerns when you provide that for children, which we need to do, the handoff to the community then becomes challenging too, because then they're getting all of those services with us. And we found that we weren't being able to get enough community resources. So we, in our community units, our field units, we have counselors now, and it's great. We really need to do that. But then you also need to make sure that there's an appropriate or a really seamless handoff so that kids can continue the care that they need. So it is really challenging because the population today it's completely different than it was 10 years ago. And it is good. It says something about right sizing the system, but the kids, you used to, the array of children that you would serve kind of would balance each other out, but you don't have that anymore, right? I mean, the kids are majority high risk, high needs. Even in our county facility, that's what these are kids now today that would have been served by the state at one time, but we're serving them, and there isn't a lot of ability to utilize outside services. The hospitals do say no all the time, and if there is a hospital stay, it's not very long, and it's so that we have to be able to manage that child when they're released. So they've been stabilized more or less, and then we have to figure that out. So, and I think we run the risk because we can do it, and a lot of us are doing it. And so then that becomes the model, right? And we don't want that to become the model.
There are two additional pieces that we haven't hit head on, so I want to bring them up here. And I see we've got about 10 minutes left. We talked a little bit about how we support staff and support that retention piece, peer support, environments of wellness. What are your thoughts on the importance of solid training for staff, both as part of the onboarding process, but on a regular basis as well as the importance of supervision for staff? And should we be thinking about those as core strategies when it comes to retention? Share a little bit of how you've approached both training and supervision within your programs and your agencies. And Brett, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think it is a core strategy. I know it's hard. It's a chicken and an egg thing. Like, you're short-staffed. How do you send people off for training? All of that. But we've really, like, for us, we've revamped. We've always had our core kind of new employee onboarding and training. But we've just recently kind of put in place essentially like a coach model. I think we call them field training coordinator, but we might have shifted the name, so I apologize. But that new staff, in addition to their supervisor, they're also going to have a coach that's going to be able to walk through a much more robust, like, kind of new employee orientation that's going to take 30 to 60 days. Like, so they're in person, they can demonstrate the skills, they can walk through it. That's something we just recently put in place. And we kind of did it from, what it came out of actually was like the most best things. It's just some kind of cool, creative, organic thing. We had secure care folks, we have other settings. Secure care folks like, look, we need to do something better for professional development. So they actually set about and said, okay, what does it take to get everybody from that day one to like they're a 1-year type staff or 2-year type staff, like they're, they know their stuff. What does it take? And they set out and created this kind of model of this kind of staff development model. And we saw that's awesome. So we grabbed it, had our training bureau grab it and took it across the board. So every unit, every team, no matter where you're working, whether you're going to be in detention, whether you're going to be in case management, you're going to walk through that same thing. You have your new employee, and then you're going to go right into this more intensive kind of coach day in, day out walkthrough of onboarding as well.
And we have a very a training program that's very developed program. We have our own in-house unit that does that training, and its best practice is very up to date, and so that everyone goes through the same process together. And this is for direct care staff I'm talking about right now. I mean, that's how that process works. During COVID, with the numbers that we've had, is it tougher? 100%. It's tougher. I mean, I've attended the trainings, gone to the trainings, and so I know exactly, and they do such a good job given the fact that it's so tough right now during COVID, and with the hiring issues that were a result of the last couple of years. One thing that we did years ago, and because of COVID, it came into question, so it's interesting to talk about it right now, is we have a 4-shift model. So instead of 3 shifts, we break up and we have 4-shift model, which allows for a training day that's built in, so every Thursday. And so they've been able to have this ongoing training, and took a hit during COVID when we didn't have enough staff, but they're back to doing it. We're doing it again. And there was a lot of talk about, do we eliminate that? Do we try to, change the staffing model because of what was going on? And everyone's really hung to the 4-shift model still, because it provides for this beautiful opportunity for people to be here paid at work, but actually doing the training as opposed to being in with the kids. And it can be used for a lot of other communication purposes too. So it's not only training, but it's an opportunity for camaraderie and kind of team building that's separate from being in the mods working. So that's worked really well, but I think we're definitely going to be bringing back part of our strategic plan a couple of years ago was on the staffing and onboarding and how to build camaraderie and support staff. And then that all, we had such a struggle with it the last few years. So we're in the midst of trying to get that going again and try to identify other areas to strengthen staff's training.
Excellent. Well, we want to reserve a couple of minutes for discussion of the project that we are leading in partnership with CSG Justice Center and the University of Cincinnati. But before I do that, one last question to kind of bring us home here is, around as we think about addressing the staffing crisis in the long term, where should we be investing our time? We've covered a lot today in this conversation. It's been a great discussion. Thanks to both of you for being part of it. It's been wonderful. What would be the top pieces that you would invest in or focus on as we think about this over the long term? And it may be many of the issues that we chatted about already, but what would be at the top of your list as we think about what we should be focusing on in the long term?
I'm happy to jump in. I think, I don't know, that's a big question. I think ultimately, you need to have a policy discussion. You need to ensure that your jurisdictions, and I know we don't control all those things, but trying to right size, trying to think about how do we best and more effectively serve youth in their home schools and communities. I think that is a big piece. And then just positive youth development, that positive youth framework kind of overarching as your 100% foundation. It will make all of these questions become a lot clearer.
Yeah, 100% agree. We have to really get people to start talking about how do you want children to be after their experience with the justice system, instead of getting mired down about what they did and what we're doing to them at this moment. The broader question is, how do we want children to be? How do we want them to be on the back end of this system, and how do we get there? And to do a flashback, I can remember as a prosecutor having these conversations with families where something bad had happened, and we got into these discussions about how we were going to address this horrible thing that happened. And part of that conversation always has to be, what do you want this to look like when it's all done? You want the best outcome. And so then how do you get to that best outcome? How do you do that? And we know that the things that we're all talking about now, the interventions that we talk about now, that's the pathway, right? Positive youth development is how you get there. And so when someone says to you, why do you have that horse program for kids? Why do those kids get to do horse programs? Well, because that's how we're going to get to where we want to go. It's through these positive experiences. And you can be tough and demanding, but still do these very positive youth development focus to get where you want to go. We have to be talking about also the type of people we want to do this work, and who do you want to do this work? What kind of person do you want to be involved in this sort of work? It's someone that you want to acknowledge and reward properly for their skill set and help them become the experts that we expect and need them to be.
Well, thanks to both of you. Very well said. And I think, starting with our values, our guiding principles, our research-based principles, and everything stemming from there, including the ways we think about our workforce and the way that we support our workforce do the job to bring those principles and those values to life. So thanks to both of you for being with us. Just in closing, I did want to share with all of our attendees that our partnership here with the CSG Justice Center and the University of Cincinnati Corrections Institute, with the support of OJJDP, is allowing us to develop resources for the field around addressing these staffing issues that we've been talking about. So we're excited about this project that we're working on collectively, really ultimately to provide resources in the form of publications and webinars and technical assistance to jurisdictions around addressing these issues around staffing. A starting point for this project will be information gathering as we continue to hear from you all in the field about not only the challenges, but the strategies that are promising in nature. And so we collectively as partners will be conducting surveys and focus groups of folks in the field, including system officials and community-based organizations that provide services to young people who are involved in the justice system. We'll be doing that at national conferences. We'll be conducting focus groups at the APPA Winter Institutes in Columbus and in Philadelphia. We'll be at the Council of Juvenile Justice Administrators winter meeting in Orlando, speaking with folks, and we'll also be conducting, as I mentioned, focus groups with those community-based providers. In addition to that, we have a survey that we'll be releasing to the field to gather information about these strategies. We are really interested in hearing from you. If you would like to support this effort, this project in any way, we would love to hear from you, whether it's your sharing of the challenges that you're seeing, the promising practices and approaches that you're seeing in your own jurisdiction, or even if it's just interest in potentially receiving training and technical assistance down the road as this project unfolds. So if you're interested in being part of the effort, we would welcome that. Just email Christina Gilbert here. Her email is cgilbert@csg.org. I'm sure Christina will put that in the chat if she hasn't already. But I want to thank everybody for taking the time to be with us. This is extraordinarily important work that we all lead. We're talking about the lives of young people and families and folks in the community, and we need to be doing everything we can to support young people and families, and investing in our workforce to make sure that they have the tools and the support to do their jobs effectively is of paramount importance. So we thank you for being with us. We look forward to partnership, and please reach out if you're interested in supporting the effort. And Christina and CSG Justice Center, thank you for being wonderful hosts here.
Thank you so much, Michael, Jill, Brett, and to all of our amazing participants for your great questions to get this discussion started. Thank you.
Be well.